Now, I'd like to invite you to the next segment of Learning with Legends.
Hey, it's Bill Kanengiser, and I wanted to talk today a little bit about tone. Why do we like the guitar so much? I think it's because the sound. We wouldn't fall in love with this instrument if it wasn't for the incredible sound of the vibrating nylon string. But for me, one of the things about the guitar is that it doesn't just have one tone. It has maybe the widest tonal range of almost any instrument, any acoustic instrument. Capable of, the most bright sounds, the most woofy sounds, not to mention, pizzicato and harmonics and percussion, and it's basically, as Segovia like to say, a mini orchestra. And tone is something we all strive for, and we all kind of are trying to get our best tone all the time. Of course, there is no such thing as one perfect tone. There's a fantastic book by John Taylor, who wrote the book called Tone Production on the Classical Guitar. Most of the ideas of this little talk are from borrowed from his book. But he says, asking a guitarist what his favorite tone is like asking a painter what his favorite color is. So it's, we want to have a wide palette. And we want to be able to use the colors that are available to us to express ourselves musically and to bring out all the possibilities of our instrument. So I wanted to talk a little bit about tone, but specifically about the thorny issue of nails and how nail shape and the idea of how we file and how we come up with length really can affect how our tone is developed. And as John Taylor lays out, one of the things that we want to try to do to get a warm, rich sound is to make the strings vibrate as much as possible perpendicular to the top. So we want the strings to be moving kind of this way. So if we go to this side camera here, you can see, like, let's say this is a guitar string. If when we pluck it, we end up pulling it up and away from the top, that tends to make the string vibrate very thinly. And if we drive it downward, it tends to make it vibrate more roundly. And that's exactly why when I do a rest stroke, we can show my fingers now, when I do a rest stroke, it's inherently more full than a free stroke. And a lot of people, when they play free stroke, they pull the string up and away from the top, and they get a thin, twangy sound. Sometimes we want a twangy sound, but let's say you want free stroke to be full. Well, I want to have the string driving down into the top a little bit. And I can even modulate the amount of angle of downward versus upward. I'll just play free stroke with my index finger and just listen to the difference between the downward it actually changes quite a bit. I'm not moving from ponticello to metallico or to tasto or anything. I'm just changing the angle of the stroke. Now, all of this works if the nail is functioning in a way that's going to help to drive the string down into the top as it goes through. And that brings us sort of to the concept of today's lecture, which is using the nail as a ramp. And to help sort of show this, I've got a little disturbingly large fingertip here to sort of show the idea of how this idea of the nail as a ramp works. Let's go to our side shot here. So now if we imagine, like this is a blown up version of what I just did on the guitar. When you look from the side, typically with most players, when they address the string, they're going to touch it somewhere in this region. And then as the stroke goes through the string, it happens very quickly, of course, but as it goes through the string will slide to a certain point near the tip, which we call the release point. So this is like the contact point sliding to the release point. And when a ramp is working well, as it slides from one to the other, it's going to naturally help to drive the string downward in its path. Okay. And it's also very important that, whoops, my nail, ouch. At the release point, that there's nothing that catches at the very last microsecond or millisecond that's going to catch the nail. Now, so this is a pretty good nail that's functioning as a ramp. Let me show you, ow, a not as well-shaped nail. Okay, so here's a nail that when you look at it from this way, it's rather pointy in the middle and very short on the sides. It could actually work if someone had a really extreme angle to their hand, like if they played way, way on the side. But for a normal hand position, what's going to happen? The string's going to jump from the flesh to a point on the nail, make a little bit of a snap, and then right here it's going to get stuck. And instead of sliding off smoothly, the only way to get it off is to snap it down or to actually have to pull it up and away. So I can approximate that kind of bad nail by playing with my bad little nail here. This is pretty sharp, so if I go, you can hear that cookie. Hear that sound? That's it jumping from the flesh to the nail, and then it's stuck, and the only way to get it through is to get that sort of horrible upward push, as opposed to a nice clean attack, a nice clean touch, and it goes smoothly to the contact point and drives through. So you can see how that works. So when we're shaping a nail, we want to try to shape it to avoid a ramp that's going to push the string in a sudden way. It has to be a gradual way. So another question that we have to address is, well, how long should my nails be? I mean, when you look at people's nails, you know, a lot of people ask me, let me see your nails. Let me see how long your nails are. And it's almost like, well, these are my nails, but if you look at them, you know, from this side or from this side, you really can't tell that much. We usually gauge it on how much white we see, and it's, oh, that guy's got really short nails or really long nails. Well, it really depends on the shape of the flesh of your fingertip. My teacher, Pepe Romero, has the world's most tapered finger pads. And so when you look at his nails, they only look like they're about that long. And then there are other people who have very, very bulbous fingertips, and so it looks like they've got super, super long nails. In a sense, the way it looks isn't nearly as important as the way it functions. And what is really important for me is the proper length of a nail should be such that when you first make contact with the string, that the nail does not hit the string, it hits the flesh. So let's say the string is moving and the first thing that hits it is the flesh. What that does is it damps the string quickly and quietly so we don't get a click. Now I'm going to land incorrectly with this nail, so we hear that little click. Well, if I do that on the guitar, here's landing on the flesh. Well, I'll do it on the bass string so it's clearer. Pretty quiet. Now if I land on the nail, so that little click there is because the first thing to hit the vibrating string is a very hard nail surface. So that's the first thing. Let's go to this big nail again. So what we actually decide would be great. So the first thing is I want to touch the flesh. Then as I slightly push in, the flesh of most people's finger is slightly flexible. You know, it's slightly cushioned. So when we put pressure into the flesh, it brings the string right into contact with the beginning of the contact point. So the string moves in, and then the nail takes over. And the nail should go smoothly in this ramp-like way, driving the string down, and then release smoothly without catching. So this nail shape works pretty well. It's going to touch on the flesh. When I dig in, it brings the nail to the string, and then the nail takes over, drives it down, and then releases it smoothly. And it's going to give me a nice warm tone. If I want to get a brighter tone, I could deliberately pull it up, but I'm capable of making a warmer sound with this. I'll show you here on actually playing. So here's my finger again. So it's touching and only touching the flesh. And as soon as I push in, it's now touching the nail. It drives through, and that's rest stroke, and then free stroke, pretty much the same. And notice I'm not having to like do any kind of lifting up to get my finger through. I'm able to drive right through and relax my finger back without catching. So if I want to play bright, I can hook it, but I'm able to get a warm free stroke sound like that. Okay, now when we try to get this ramp shape, we have to take into consideration that everybody's anatomy is different. We already talked about some people have bulbous nail tips, bulbous fingertips, or real tapered. Well, the other thing is almost everybody has a different curvature to their nail. And most people actually have different curvatures even from finger to finger. If you look at my index, it's fairly flat in the middle. My middle finger is a little more curved, and my A finger is actually quite curved. My little finger, which I don't use that much, very curved. And some people have really flat nails that hook. Some people have very curved nails. And these individual variances explain why some people have nails that look very, very short or very flat in the middle, or very tapered on one side. It also depends upon your basic hand position. Let's go to the front camera just for a second. There are some players who play with a fairly diagonal hand position, and that's to sort of soften the release. My friend David Russell's kind of famous for that, for his silky tone, right? There's some players who play pretty much straight on. Pepe Romero and John Williams are famous for that, and it sort of explains why they have completely different looking nail shapes. If you look at David Russell's nail shape or Pepe's, they look completely different, but they both sound great because they're using the same basic idea of using the nail as a ramp and shaping it in a way that's going to best utilize this barrier to move the string the way they want. So when we're trying to figure out how to shape the nail, I like to think of it as defining a plane that the file is going to cut in the nail. And the best way to think of it, I think, is to imagine a line coming straight out of the finger. And that's an axis that we're going to use to define two angles to hold the file. So there's this and that. So out of my finger, there's this imaginary line. And I'm going to hold the file. Maybe we'll go to the side shot just for a second. I have to do this backwards. So if you imagine that line coming straight out of my finger, I have to have two angles of rotation. One is, what's the angle that I'm going to rotate the file this way? And then the other is, what's the angle that I'm going to rotate the file this way? And that's where the individual variation takes place. And the kind of basic way to think about it is, this angle of rotation is pretty much determined by the amount of curvature of the nail. The more curved the nail is, the slightly higher angle we should use. So a really flat nail is going to be a flatter angle. A really curved nail is going to be a slightly higher angle. Okay, so let me get the big file out. Let's see if we can do this. So let's maybe go to the side guy. So let me see if I can get not so much glare. So this is kind of like a normal curvature nail, and it's, let me get the angle right, it's about 45 degrees, if you can see. So I hold the file at about a 45-degree angle. Well, if I have a really flat nail, I'm going to want to hold the file at a little lower angle relative to it. If I have a really curved nail, I'm going to have the file at a higher angle to it. Okay? And by making that adjustment, what we'll do is be able to cut the nail at the correct angle that way. The other angle to try to do is this angle. And this is the one that's very dependent upon your hand position, whether you play way on the side or straight on. And even from finger to finger, it will change. But once you define this angle, and you've already defined that one, essentially there's a plane that I've now defined that's going to cut my ramp. And when I look at my nails, like everybody wants to see my nails, and they say, let me see your nails, and they want to look at it straight on like this or straight on like that. It doesn't tell me anything. The only angle that tells me anything is that angle. And when I look at my nail from that angle, it's essentially a straight line. And you can see how the file is defining a straight line. And here you can see how the straight line of my middle finger is slightly at a different angle. The straight line of my A finger is at a slightly different angle. But they're all following the same idea, which develops a ramp. So let's go back to the big guy here. So for my, whoa, that's big. Let's back up. There we go. So this is my normal ramp, let's say my index finger, and I cut that curve, and that's the one I'm going to get. If I have a more curved nail, let's say this is my A nail, I'm going to hold the file at a higher angle to it, but still define this plane. If I've got a really flat nail, if I happen to have a flat nail, let's put it there. It's kind of painful to pull my nails off. Then it's going to be lower. This was the A nail, this was the I nail, this is this flat nail. Okay, and you know, some people have like very different nail shapes. Like let's say you're a very diagonal player, like a, you know, sort of David Russell, Yamashita kind of player, and you might then have a much more extreme angle, which, you know, makes it look like a completely different shape, right? Like this was my one shape, and you look at that and you say, well, how does this person get the same sound as that? Well, it's because it's functioning as the same ramp as it moves through, even though it looks totally different from the outside. So it's still functioning exactly the same way. It's just a personal variance. Okay, and you know, the other little point I wanted to make was from finger to finger, you know, on most, I think on almost universally, you know, people think, oh, my fingers approach the strings from the same angle, all three fingers. Well, if you look at the construction of our hands, they're kind of radially arranged. They're not completely parallel to each other. You know, it's kind of like the middle finger is straight, right? And then this is at an angle and this is at an angle. So we shouldn't really have the same exact angle to all three of the nails. So when I set this angle for my nails, you see how my I finger is about like that. My M is a little bit moved that way, and my A is actually kind of backwards. This is, some people look at my A nail and think I'm insane, but hey, it works for me. So my A nail actually, when you look at it from the side, kind of has this angle where it's actually slightly longer on the contact side than it is on the release side. But it's, when you look at it like this, it's still a flat line. It's just, I've just extended this angle backwards. And when I play with it, it still is functioning as a ramp and releasing smoothly. If my A nail was too long on the release side, it would catch, sort of, I can approximate it by changing my angle and getting that sharp attack. This way it's working, I think, really well. So this is a basic idea of how to file, how to set the angle of your file, how to create this ramp effect. But here's the thing. You could have the perfect shape to your nail, perfect length, everything right, but if the surface is bumpy or has irregularities in it, and especially if the release point has any kind of little notch or glue or anything that's the last thing that the nail sees, it's going to mess up your sound. So like a perfect shape with a bad surface is always going to sound bad. Funny thing is, a really bad nail that's either too long, too short, not the right shape, with a great surface, probably sounds okay. So it's better to have a really good surface. So what are the important things about getting the surface right? Well, let me show you. This is what I would consider a well-shaped nail. Look, it's got a great ramp, right? Really good ramp, right? But if you look at it really closely, there's little bumps along the surface. Like, see those little cook, 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 cook? And when I rub this against it, you can hear that? And when I go across the string, listen. So those little scratches are very different from this. I don't know if this is my good one or not, but there's no bumping, it's smoothly going across. So what's important when you're filing is to make sure that you get a silky smooth surface, and especially to realize that the nail has some thickness to it. It has a top and a bottom, and the string is riding across the lower edge, the underneath side of the nail first, when it first makes contact. So it's really important to have a smooth inside edge. When I take my file, I really work in close on the underneath side of the nail, way in here. And I use like another nail on another hand, like my, this nail, to rub the surface. And I'm feeling for little bumps or little inconsistencies. And by scratching across it, it's almost like an LP record. You can hear almost or feel where the little bumps in the road are. So I'm making sure that this underneath side is really smooth. And then the top of the release side is crucially important. Let me go to yet another nail. This has a pretty good shape, right? Pretty good shape, very nice underneath surface. But right at the release point, there's a little notch. And this could be like a bad spot in the nail, a crack, or even some glue. So it's sliding silently. But right at the end, it hooks, and it won't clear, and that will make a very sharp, pingy sound. And I can't tell you how many times I've had a perfect nail, but one little tiny glop of glue on just the wrong spot, and it sounds just horrible. So when filing, but especially when sanding, I pay a special important attention to the top of the release point, because the string's going to move from the bottom and then right about here transition to the front and then leave at the top. And if the top of the release side is really smooth, it will smooth out that attack, and you won't get that little click at the end. So these are all my little tools. I got my I've had this file for about 20 years. It's so worn down from me using it, it hardly does anything anymore. And then I like using these little buffers to knock off extra nail, after I filed. And then I really like, people use all kinds of different sandpaper and stuff. I really like this, whatever this stuff is. Super fine. And when I go into polish, I really get in there underneath the nail and really work it, and really get on the top to get a buff glass-like finish. When I rub it, it should feel totally smooth so that it's going to catch just right and glide right through. And so we can go to the front shot now. And so the idea in a way is to have your nails shaped so that you can get your warmest possible sound, driving the strings into the top a little bit, and if you want, you can then get the bright sounds you need. But the hardest thing is to get that full, rich tone, especially out of the free stroke. Well, I hope these little nails have helped to solve your nail problems. So, and maybe I've hit the nail on the head. Well, thanks for paying attention. This has been Bill.